The Galactic Academy was a grand structure, towering over the alien world where it stood, built with advanced technology and ancient wisdom. Its halls were filled with cadets from across the universe, beings from species that had mastered the art of war for centuries. Today was the first day of the new semester, and cadets were gathered in the massive training hall, where they were about to face their first test. Among the hundreds of students, one cadet stood out: Private Liam Hawk Hawthorne, a human. He was young, barely out of his teens, with the wide eyes of someone who had never seen a galaxy so vast. Hawk had never been in a place like this before, surrounded by beings far stronger, faster, and smarter than him. He was the smallest cadet in the room, his light frame barely noticeable among the towering aliens. The other cadets weren't much better than him, or so Hawk thought. There were beings with 4 arms, those whose skin was made of impenetrable exoskeletons, others who could stretch their limbs with terrifying speed. Hawk could already hear the whispers, feel the cold stares of the other cadets. It was a feeling he was used to, the feeling of being the underdog. Yet despite all the differences, one thing remained the same. Every single cadet in the room had one goal: to survive, to prove themselves in the harshest of battles. But there was something strange about the humans. Despite the noise and chaos around him, Hawk stood still, his eyes straight ahead, focusing only on the task at hand. He didn't fidget. He didn't talk to anyone. The other cadets couldn't understand why the humans were so quiet, so composed. To them, the silence was unsettling. Why weren't the humans nervous? Why did they sit so still, almost as if they were waiting for something? These questions hung in the air like an invisible weight. The instructors, a group of powerful, ancient beings from various star systems, observed from above. They were a stern, silent lot, their faces unreadable as they watched the cadets. They had taught countless species, seen them train, seen them fight, but they had never seen a race like humans. They had heard of humanity's reputation, but had they truly earned it? Were they worthy of the reputation they held? As the cadets waited, the atmosphere thickened. Hawk's heart raced, but it wasn't fear that twisted in his chest. It was something else, something deeper. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, for the chance to prove that he wasn't just another weakling. He had trained with every ounce of his being, pushing himself beyond human limits. This was his time. This was what he had fought for, what he had bled for. The lead instructor, a towering figure with the sleek, glimmering skin of an insectoid species, stepped forward, his voice echoing in the hall. "Cadets, welcome to the academy," he said, his voice deep and cold. "You are here because you have shown potential, but potential means nothing if it cannot be proven. Here we test you. Here you will fight, you will struggle, and you will prove your worth." The other cadets stiffened, but Hawk remained still, his breathing steady. He had faced struggles before. His whole life had been about fighting against the odds, and he knew that the greatest battles were never won by strength alone. They were won by the will to keep going, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how impossible it seemed. He didn't know what the instructors had in mind, but Hawk was ready. "You will face your first test soon," the instructor continued. "This test is not for the weak-hearted. You will be thrust into the arena, a place where survival is the only option. Only the strong will remain standing." The words echoed in Hawk's mind. He had heard them before. Survival of the fittest. Every test he had ever faced had been a challenge, but it was also a chance to prove that strength wasn't just about size or power. It was about heart. It was about how much you could endure and still get up, still push forward. The instructor's eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on the humans. "And you humans," he said, his tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "I have heard stories. You think you are different, but I wonder, what is it that makes you so confident? Why do you sit so quietly while the rest of you squirm? Why do you not fear what is to come?" Hawk's gaze met the instructor's, calm and unwavering. The room fell silent. All eyes were on him now. The instructor's words weren't meant to challenge him directly, but they struck a nerve nonetheless. The alien was right to be curious. Humans weren't big. They weren't fast. They didn't have any of the advantages that the other species had. What they did have, though, was something that couldn't be measured in size or strength. Humans had something deeper, something that couldn't be taught. They had resilience, and resilience couldn't be stopped. Not by weapons, not by size, and not by anything the galaxy threw at them. Hawk knew that better than anyone. He had seen his fellow humans rise when all hope seemed lost, fight on when the world was against them. With a deep breath, Hawk straightened up and looked the instructor in the eye. "We sit quietly," he said, his voice steady, "because we're ready for whatever comes next. And when the time comes, we'll show you why humans are not to be underestimated." For a brief moment, the instructor looked taken aback. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the hall, the doors sliding closed behind him with a hiss. The silence in the room stretched, broken only by the hum of the lights above. Hawk's heart pounded in his chest. The challenge had been laid down. And this time he wasn't going to back down. He would show them all, what it truly meant to be human. He wasn't just there to survive. He was there to win. The arena was massive, a sprawling battlefield designed to push every cadet to their limits. The air was thick with tension, the cold stone underfoot, the sky above dark and swirling with storm clouds. This wasn't a friendly sparring session, this was a test of survival, and everyone knew it. Hawk stood at the edge of the battlefield, his heart pounding. Around him, cadets from various species shifted nervously, adjusting their weapons or muttering prayers in their native tongues. The aliens had long since grown accustomed to this. Their species had been in the business of war for centuries. But the humans, they weren't like the rest. They were smaller, their muscles less defined, their weapons less advanced. The instructors had put them in the most difficult group, a group that was clearly meant to fail. Hawk glanced at the other humans in his unit. He saw the same determination in their eyes. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet none of them looked ready to quit. They had all been through hell to get here, and no alien warrior or strange creature was going to break them. As the signal sounded, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The enemy was coming. From the opposite side of the arena, a group of alien warriors advanced, tall, sleek, and armored in shimmering metal. Their faces were obscured by helmets, but the way they moved spoke volumes. They were trained to kill, and they didn't hesitate. Their weapons hummed with energy, ready to bring death. The first blast came with no warning. A loud boom split the air, and Hawk instinctively dove to the side. The ground where he had stood just a moment before exploded in a shower of dust and debris. His heart raced as he rolled behind a boulder for cover, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The rest of the humans followed suit, taking cover wherever they could find it. The aliens weren't wasting any time. They advanced in a steady, coordinated line, using their energy rifles to fire at anything that moved. Hawk's hand went to his side, gripping the blaster tightly. His fingers tightened around the weapon, the cold metal digging into his palm. He didn't know how long they could hold out, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going down without a fight. The enemy didn't care who they were up against. To them, the humans were just another group of cadets, weak, vulnerable, and easy prey. But Hawk had something they didn't expect, a will that couldn't be broken. "Now," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. His squad sprang into action, moving in perfect sync, darting from cover to cover. The first alien soldier appeared from behind a rock, weapon raised. Hawk fired first, a single shot that caught the alien in the chest. The creature staggered, a plume of bright red blood bursting from its armor. The alien crumpled to the ground with a dull thud. One down. But the battle was far from over. The rest of the enemy soldiers fired back, their blasts narrowly missing Hawk as he ducked behind another rock. His squad wasn't in much better shape. They were pinned down, each of them trying to find a way to fight back. "Stay close, keep moving," Hawk yelled, trying to rally his squad. They couldn't just wait for the aliens to pick them off one by one. They had to take the fight to them. But as the minutes passed, the situation grew worse. The aliens were too well organized, too experienced. For every alien that fell, two more took its place. Hawk could see the exhaustion starting to creep into his squad's faces. The energy blasts were relentless, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and blood. He couldn't let them fall. Not now, not when they were so close. Hawk's mind raced, calculating the next move. Then it hit him, flanking. They had to get around the aliens, use their numbers against them. The humans couldn't win in a head-on fight, but if they could outsmart them, they stood a chance. "Follow me," Hawk shouted again, his voice steady but urgent. Without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward a narrow gap between two massive boulders. His squad followed, staying close, covering each other as they ran. It wasn't easy. The aliens were everywhere, and the blasts were getting closer. Hawk heard one of his squadmates cry out as an energy bolt struck them in the leg. The soldier collapsed, but Hawk didn't hesitate. He shot two quick shots at the aliens closing in on them, buying just enough time to get the wounded soldier to safety. "Don't stop," Hawk urged, gritting his teeth. "We keep moving, we fight back, and we win." They reached the flank. Hawk's plan was risky, but it was their only shot. His squad split into two groups, one to the left, one to the right. The idea was simple: attack the aliens from both sides, forcing them to split their attention. "Now," Hawk yelled again. The two groups emerged from their cover simultaneously, firing in perfect unison. The surprise attack caught the aliens off guard. They were quick to recover, but not fast enough. The humans were relentless, moving like a single, well-oiled machine. Hawk didn't know how long they could keep it up, but as he took down another enemy, he realized something. The aliens hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected humans to fight back like this. They were trained to fight wars, yes, but they hadn't prepared for the sheer tenacity of the human spirit. As the minutes wore on, Hawk's squad had whittled down the alien forces, but it was clear that the battle was far from over. They were running low on ammo, their bodies bruised and bloodied. Yet Hawk could see something in his squadmates: eyes, determination, courage, a refusal to give in. They weren't going to stop. Not now. And neither was Hawk. He tightened his grip on his blaster, his chest rising and falling with every breath. The fight wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The battle had raged for what felt like an eternity. The sound of blaster fire echoed across the arena, mixed with the heavy thud of alien feet pounding against the ground. Hawk's squad was on the edge, the fatigue creeping into their bones, but they kept pushing forward, never slowing. They had no choice. They couldn't afford to stop. Hawk's breath came in ragged gasps as he crouched behind a jagged rock, his eyes scanning the battlefield. His hands were slick with sweat and blood, the blaster in his grip trembling slightly. The alien forces were relentless, firing from every angle, cutting off their retreat. The squad was down to just 5 now, and Hawk's heart tightened as he looked over the remaining members. Corporal Diaz, who had been by his side through thick and thin, was clutching her side, blood soaking through her uniform. Private First Class Jordan, a kid barely older than Hawk, was holding his rifle with shaking hands, his face pale. Sergeant Allen, the oldest of the squad, was crouched low, his face a mask of determination, but Hawk could see the exhaustion in his eyes. They were all tired, they were all hurting, but they weren't broken. "Just a little longer," Hawk muttered to himself, the words barely escaping his lips. He knew it was true, but the doubt began to creep in. Could they really hold out? They were so outnumbered, so outclassed. The alien forces seemed endless, their weapons powerful, their tactics flawless. It was only a matter of time before the final blow came. Hawk's mind raced. His thoughts kept turning back to the aliens' superior tactics, their technological advantages. They had every weapon imaginable, every strength in the galaxy. What did they have? Courage, willpower, the knowledge that they could not afford to fail. He knew it wasn't enough, or was it? Suddenly, a scream cut through the air, sharp, guttural. It wasn't from one of the humans. Hawk's heart skipped a beat as he whipped his head around. Through the dust and smoke, he saw one of the alien commanders charging toward them, his hulking form casting a shadow over the battlefield. The alien was massive, its armor gleaming in the weak light, its weapon, a long, deadly staff that crackled with energy. The squad froze, their eyes locked on the oncoming beast. Hawk's stomach twisted. This was the final test. The alien was no ordinary soldier. He was a commander, a leader among their kind, and his presence on the battlefield meant the aliens had no intention of retreating. "Get ready," Hawk barked, though his own voice faltered. There was no plan, there was no strategy that could beat this. The alien roared, its voice a guttural growl that sent a wave of fear through Hawk's squad. But Hawk didn't have the luxury of fear. He had only the fight ahead. The alien reached them in a flash, swinging its staff with terrifying speed. Hawk dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, but the blast from the staff exploded behind him, sending rocks flying and dust choking the air. He heard the painful grunt of Jordan as a piece of debris clipped him in the shoulder, but Hawk didn't have time to check on him. He was already on his feet, his hand gripping his blaster. "Focus," Hawk shouted, rallying his team. "Don't stop, we can do this." The rest of the squad fired, their shots glancing off the alien's thick armor, but it barely seemed to slow him down. Hawk's heart pounded as he saw the creature charging again, its massive weapon raised high. He had to act. They had to do something now before it was too late. "Diaz, Jordan, cover me," Hawk ordered, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "Allen, on me." With that, Hawk bolted forward, ignoring the blasts whizzing past him. He wasn't sure how much longer he could last, but this was it. He had to do something. He had to make this fight count. The alien commander swung its staff in a wide arc, and Hawk ducked just in time, the energy blast singing the air above him. He fired twice, but both shots bounced off the alien's armor. No good. Then in the chaos, something clicked. Hawk didn't have the strength to defeat this beast in a straight fight, but he didn't need strength. He needed speed and wits. He ran, leading the alien in a wild chase around the crumbled rocks, using the terrain to his advantage. The alien followed, its growls echoing through the battlefield. Hawk's squad followed his lead, keeping their distance, firing whenever they could. And then, just as the alien was closing in, Hawk dove forward, rolling to the side at the last second. The alien staff slammed into a massive boulder where Hawk had been standing, the impact causing the rock to crack and crumble. It was perfect. "Now," Hawk shouted. The squad leapt into action, their shots aimed at the alien's exposed back. Diaz fired from the left, Allen from the right, and Jordan took a shot from the high ground. The alien commander staggered, the blast hitting its unprotected flank, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. But Hawk wasn't finished. His eyes flicked to the detonator strapped to his belt, the one he had taken from a fallen alien soldier earlier. Without hesitation, he ripped it off, his heart racing. He sprinted to the front of the alien, jumping and diving beneath its legs. In one fluid motion, Hawk slapped the detonator onto the alien's armor. "Back, back now," he shouted. The squad pulled back in unison as Hawk dove out of the alien's range. The alien tried to reach for him, but it was too late. The explosion ripped through the air, sending a shockwave of force that knocked Hawk and his squad off their feet. The alien commander roared, its armor glowing with a brief, blinding flash of energy. But when the smoke cleared, the alien was lying motionless on the ground, its massive form crumpled. The battlefield fell silent. The roar of battle had stopped. Hawk's chest heaved with exhaustion, his limbs weak. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, blood, and burnt metal. But in that moment, Hawk allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in hours. Relief. He looked back at his squad, battered but standing. They had done it. They had taken down the most dangerous enemy they had faced. But they weren't out of danger yet. The battlefield was eerily quiet after the explosion. Smoke rose in thick clouds, swirling around the fallen alien commander, whose massive body was now a twisted heap of charred armor and broken limbs. Hawk's heart still pounded in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But even as he caught his breath, he knew they couldn't afford to stop. There was no time for celebration. The alien forces were regrouping. Hawk could already see more soldiers advancing from the far side of the arena. They were preparing for another attack, and this time they wouldn't hold back. Hawk could feel the weight of their stares from the distant observation decks, the instructors watching their every move. They needed to prove they could survive this. "Dia's you good?" Hawk asked, his voice hoarse but steady. The corporal nodded, her face pale and smeared with dirt and blood. "Yeah, just a scratch," she said, though her left side was soaked in blood. Hawk didn't believe her for a second, but there was no time to argue. They had to keep moving. "Alan, Jordan, we need a plan," Hawk continued, turning to the other two. Sergeant Allen was breathing heavily, his hand clutching his side where he'd taken a hit earlier. Jordan was still trembling, his rifle pointed nervously toward the advancing aliens. "We can't stay here," Sergeant Allen said, his voice rough. "We're outnumbered and they've got us pinned." Hawk's eyes flicked over the battlefield. It was clear that their position was compromised. The alien forces were closing in from every direction, their numbers growing. Hawk could see movement in the distance. Something was coming, something big. His gut twisted with the sickening realization that their escape route was closing fast. They needed a way out, a way to turn the tide in their favor. "What if we go for the generator?" Jordan asked, his voice tight with fear. He was pointing toward a towering structure in the center of the arena, the power core that powered the entire facility. If they could destroy it, they could cripple the enemy's defenses. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Hawk nodded slowly, his mind racing. "If we can get to it, we might have a chance, but it'll be heavily guarded." "We'll never get close," Allen muttered, looking at the alien forces closing in. "They've got us surrounded." Hawk's thoughts whirled. They needed a distraction. They needed something to draw the enemy's attention long enough for them to make a move. He looked at the remains of the alien commander, and suddenly an idea formed, a crazy, dangerous idea. It was a gamble, but it was the only shot they had left. He turned back to his squad, his expression grim. "We make a diversion. I'll draw their attention, you take the generator." Allen's eyes narrowed. "You're out of your mind, Hawk." "It's the only way," Hawk said firmly, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "We don't have a choice. Either we fight like hell or we die here, so who's with me?" For a long moment there was only silence. Then Diaz nodded, despite the blood staining her uniform. "I'm with you." Jordan hesitated for a heartbeat, but then, as though making a decision deep within, he tightened his grip on his blaster. "I'm in." Allen sighed, his voice heavy. "This is madness, but it's our only chance." Hawk clapped his hand on the sergeant's shoulder. "We're not backing down. Now let's move." Without another word, Hawk broke from cover and sprinted toward the center of the arena. The rest of his squad followed, moving as quietly as they could in the thick smoke. The alien forces hadn't noticed them yet. They were too focused on the wreckage of the fallen commander and the advancing reinforcements. Hawk knew this was their only window. As he ran, his mind raced with plans. He had no backup, no reinforcements. It was just him and his squad against a powerful enemy. He wasn't sure they could pull it off. But then again, he didn't know how many times he had been told that it was impossible, only to prove them wrong. That's what humans did, didn't they? They defied the odds. The alien forces were beginning to notice them now. Blaster fire zipped past Hawk's head, and he could hear the angry roars of the approaching aliens. They were closing in. Fast. "Go!" Hawk shouted, pulling the detonator from his belt as he skidded behind a large pile of debris. He hurled the device toward the alien forces and dove for cover. The explosion sent a shockwave through the ground, shaking the very air around them. The aliens scattered, momentarily stunned by the blast. "Now's our chance," Hawk screamed, his voice barely audible over the noise. He darted out from cover and sprinted toward the generator. His squad was right behind him, their blasters firing in unison to cover his movements. Every step felt like an eternity. Hawk could hear the sound of alien soldiers regrouping, their weapons powering up. They were getting ready to strike back, but they were too late. Hawk had already made it to the generator. He didn't hesitate. He set the charges, planting them quickly and carefully on the weak points of the power core. His hands were shaking as he worked, the sound of the approaching enemy soldiers growing louder. Time was running out. "Clear out now," Hawk shouted, hitting the detonator switch. The explosion was deafening. The power core erupted in a blast of light, sending a wave of energy that knocked Hawk off his feet. The ground beneath him trembled as the shockwave ripped through the arena. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Then the energy core collapsed, its structure crumbling into a pile of debris. When the dust settled, Hawk could hardly believe it. They had done it. But the battle wasn't over yet. Hawk pulled himself to his feet, his breath ragged. The alien forces were still closing in. There was no time to rest. The fight was far from won. "Get ready," Hawk muttered. "This is just the beginning." The explosion from the power core was deafening, the shockwave ripping through the battlefield. Hawk's body was thrown to the ground, his world spinning for a moment as the dust cloud rose around him. His ears rang from the blast, and his eyes struggled to adjust to the sudden darkness. When the smoke cleared, Hawk slowly pushed himself up. His limbs ached and his head spun, but he forced himself to focus. They had done it. The generator was down. The alien forces were momentarily thrown into chaos, their power disrupted. But it wouldn't last. They had bought themselves a few precious seconds. "Diaz, Allen, Jordan," Hawk shouted, his voice hoarse. His throat was dry, but the words came out with the force of a command. His squad had scattered during the explosion, and he needed to know they were still standing. One by one, his squadmates responded, emerging from the smoke like ghosts. They were battered, covered in dirt and blood, but they were alive. "I'm here," Diaz called, her voice faint but steady as she limped toward him. Her side was still bleeding, but she wasn't stopping. She had the same fire in her eyes as always. "Still good," Allen said with a strained smile, though his eyes betrayed the exhaustion in his body. He'd been hit earlier, and Hawk knew he wasn't in any condition to keep fighting, but he was still here, still standing. "Same," Jordan replied, his voice cracking. The young soldier was covered in dust, his face pale, but his eyes had the same resolve. He might have been shaking, but he hadn't run. He hadn't given up. Hawk allowed himself a brief moment of relief. They were still alive. They had made it through the explosion and they had crippled the enemy's power source. But they weren't done yet, not by a long shot. The sound of alien soldiers regrouping came from all directions. The shock of losing the power core had rattled them, but they weren't finished. If anything, the aliens were angrier now, and Hawk knew they would come at them with everything they had. Their survival depended on whether they could hold the line long enough for the power shift to truly matter. "Fall back to the ridge," Hawk shouted, pointing toward a high point on the arena's edge. If they could make it there, they might be able to find some cover and make their last stand. The aliens would have to come to them, and Hawk knew even if they were outnumbered, they could make it. The squad moved quickly, their steps unsteady but determined. As they ran, Hawk's mind raced. They had no more grenades, no more ammo, only what was left in their blasters and whatever strategy they could scrape together. They needed to make it count. The ridge was a few hundred yards away, but every step felt like a lifetime. The alien soldiers had already begun their pursuit, and the sounds of heavy footsteps behind them were growing louder. Hawk could see shadows moving in the distance, and he knew they were closing in fast. "Keep moving, don't stop," Hawk shouted. His voice was sharp, commanding, but he felt a tightness in his chest. He didn't know how much longer they could run. Their legs were heavy, their bodies worn, but they couldn't stop. Not now. As they neared the ridge, a bolt of energy tore through the air, narrowly missing Diaz. The squad scattered, diving for cover behind a series of rocks and crumbled walls. "Take cover," Hawk yelled, his heart racing. He barely had time to duck behind a boulder as the aliens opened fire. For a moment, there was nothing but chaos. The blaster fire lit up the battlefield, bright streaks of energy cutting through the air. The sound was deafening, but Hawk barely heard it over the pounding of his own heart. His hands shook as he aimed his blaster, firing at the approaching alien forces. "Return fire, give us some breathing room," Hawk ordered. His voice was hoarse, raw, but it carried through the chaos. Alan fired first, his shots hitting one of the alien soldiers square in the chest. The creature crumpled, but there were more, so many more. Hawk's squad wasn't backing down, though. They fired relentlessly, pushing the aliens back for a brief moment, creating just enough space to breathe. The ridge wasn't far now. Hawk could see the top of it just beyond the next line of rocks. They were almost there. "Almost there," Hawk shouted, his voice full of urgency. They had to make it. They had to hold out just a little longer. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Hawk saw something that stopped him dead in his tracks. A massive alien soldier, larger than the others, was charging straight toward them, its eyes filled with fury. It was wielding a weapon that crackled with dark energy, a weapon that looked as though it could tear through a tank. It was an elite soldier, and it was heading right for them. "Get down!" Hawk yelled, diving toward the ground just as the elite soldier's weapon fired, a beam of energy streaking through the air. The blast slammed into a nearby rock, sending it into pieces. The explosion shook the ground beneath them. They were running out of time. The alien forces were overwhelming them, and the ridge seemed farther than ever. "Hawk, we can't keep this up," Alan shouted, his voice strained with fear. Hawk's mind raced. They had only one option left. If they didn't act now, they were finished. "Follow me," Hawk shouted, his voice filled with a new resolve. "We're going up." Without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward the highest point of the ridge, his legs burning with exhaustion. The rest of his squad followed, their eyes locked on him, trust in their every step. As they climbed, Hawk's heart pounded, and the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He could feel the eyes of the alien forces on them, but he refused to stop. He didn't know if they'd survive the next few minutes, but he would fight until his last breath. Because that. Hawk's chest burned with every breath. His legs, already weak from exhaustion, felt like they were made of stone, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The ridge was within reach now, just ahead, and if they could make it to the top, they might have a chance. The rocks beneath his feet were uneven, jagged, but Hawk climbed without hesitation, his eyes fixed on the summit. Behind him, his squad followed, struggling but determined. Diaz, though bloodied and bruised, kept pace. Alan, still holding his side where he'd been wounded earlier, gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Jordan, the youngest of them, barely able to catch his breath, stayed close, his eyes wide with fear but never faltering. "Keep moving, we're almost there," Hawk shouted, trying to push them forward, even as the sound of alien footsteps grew louder. But the alien forces were relentless. They were getting closer. Hawk glanced back briefly and his heart sank. The massive alien warrior, the one with the energy weapon that had almost torn them apart earlier, was charging up the slope after them. It was fast, its movements like a predator on the hunt. It was bigger than anything Hawk had faced before, its armor gleaming with lethal efficiency. And it was focused solely on them. "Hawk, we can't outrun that thing," Alan shouted, his voice strained, panic beginning to rise. "We don't need to outrun it," Hawk replied, gritting his teeth. "We just need to hold our ground." The top of the ridge was now just a few feet away. Hawk pushed harder, his breath ragged, his muscles screaming in protest. Every part of him wanted to stop, to give in to the fatigue, but he couldn't. Not now, not when they were so close. When Hawk finally reached the top, he quickly dropped to his knees, taking cover behind a pile of loose rocks. The others were right behind him, sliding into position. The alien soldiers were gaining ground, but Hawk wasn't ready to give up yet. He dug into his pack, pulling out the last of their explosives. It wasn't much, just a few small charges, but it would have to be enough. "We're going to make our stand here," Hawk said, his voice steady though inside he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "We use the charges to slow them down, and we fight until we can't fight anymore." Diaz nodded, her face grim but her eyes filled with determination. She might be wounded, but she was ready to fight. Alan adjusted his grip on his blaster, his face set in a mask of quiet resolve. Jordan swallowed hard, his eyes wide, but his hands were steady. Hawk turned his attention back to the battlefield below. The alien soldiers were almost at the top now. They could see the movement of their enemies, and they knew there was no turning back. Hawk quickly set up the explosives, positioning them carefully along the ridge. They would create a barrier, a wall of fire that would slow the aliens long enough for them to make their final stand. He could hear the alien soldiers now, their voices low but menacing as they closed in on their position. Hawk felt his pulse quicken. He didn't know if they would survive this. He didn't know if he could protect his squad, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to back down. "Get ready," Hawk said, his voice calm. "When I give the signal, we light them up." The alien warrior was the first to emerge from the smoke, its massive figure looming over them like a shadow. It looked down at Hawk and his squad, its eyes glowing with cold, inhuman malice. The rest of the alien soldiers followed, their weapons raised, ready to fire. Hawk's finger hovered over the detonator. The moment had come. "Now," he yelled, slamming his finger down on the button. The explosion was deafening. The ridge exploded in a burst of fire, sending alien soldiers tumbling backward, some of them caught in the blast. The shockwave rippled through the air, knocking others off their feet. Hawk saw the alien warrior stagger, momentarily disoriented by the blast, and seized the opportunity. He fired his blaster, aiming for the alien's exposed side. The alien roared in pain but didn't fall. It was still standing, still coming toward them. "Fire, don't stop," Hawk screamed, his voice raw with urgency. The squad opened fire, each shot finding its mark. The alien warriors were retreating slightly, trying to regroup, but they weren't retreating for long. The alien commander, the one with the energy weapon, was still coming, undeterred by the blasts and the smoke. Hawk could see it now. This was their last stand. This was the moment where everything would either fall apart or come together. They could only hold for so long before the aliens overwhelmed them. They had no more tricks, no more distractions. But Hawk wasn't ready to give up. The alien warrior charged, its weapon raised high. Hawk could see the fatal energy crackling at the tip of its staff. His squad's shots were bouncing off its armor, making little more than a dent in the steel-like surface. Hawk's breath caught in his throat as the alien drew closer. Just as the alien raised its weapon to strike, Hawk saw the opening. It was brief, but it was enough. He dove forward, ignoring the pain that shot through his body, and aimed his blaster at the alien's exposed arm. The shot hit with pinpoint accuracy, and the alien howled in pain, its weapon dropping to the ground with a loud clang. It staggered back, off balance. Now Hawk screamed. Diaz was the first to respond, firing her blaster directly at the alien's vulnerable head. The blast hit hard and the alien collapsed, its body going limp. There was a moment of silence. And then the rest of the alien forces faltered. They had seen their commander fall, and something in their eyes shifted: uncertainty, hesitation. Hawk's squad didn't wait. They kept firing, pushing forward with everything they had left. Every shot was a defiant scream, a refusal to give in. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore, they were fighting for each other. The alien forces began to retreat, their morale shattered by the fall of their leader. One by one, they turned and fled, their ranks breaking as the humans continued their relentless assault. And then at last it was over. The battlefield fell silent. The last of the alien forces had retreated, leaving Hawk and his squad standing alone, breathing heavily, covered in blood and sweat, but alive. They had done it. Against all odds they had won. The silence that followed the retreat of the alien forces was almost deafening. The battlefield, once alive with chaos and blaster fire, was now still. The air, thick with the acrid smell of smoke and burned metal, felt heavy. Hawk's body ached from head to toe, but it was a different kind of pain now, the kind that came after surviving something impossible. His chest rose and fell with each labored breath as he lowered his blaster, the weapon still warm in his hands. His legs trembled from exhaustion, but he forced himself to stand tall. The dust hung in the air and the remnants of the battlefield lay scattered around them, broken weapons, destroyed armor, and the fallen bodies of both their allies and enemies. Hawk's eyes scanned the landscape, his gaze slowly moving across the squad. They were battered, bloodied, but they were still here. They had made it. Diaz was the first to speak, her voice raspy but filled with pride. "We did it," she said, looking over the ruined landscape, her eyes scanning for any remaining threats. "We actually did it." Hawk nodded, his mouth dry. "Yeah, we did." He allowed himself a small, weary smile, though the weight of everything they had just endured still pressed on his shoulders. He looked over at Alan and Jordan, both of whom were covered in dirt and bruises. Alan had the look of a man who had been pushed past his limits but had refused to give in. Jordan was quieter than usual, his face pale and drawn, but there was a spark of something in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. "We made it through because we fought together," Hawk said, his voice steady despite the fatigue. "We never gave up. No matter how many times they hit us, we got back up." Alan grinned, though it was a tired, pained grin. "You've got the heart of a lion, Hawk, and you don't give up. You kept us going." Hawk's eyes flicked to his squad. "It wasn't just me, it was all of us. We're still standing because we stuck together. We looked out for each other." Jordan nodded, though his face was still pale. "I didn't think we could do it, but you made me believe we could." Hawk could feel the weight of the words settle deep in his chest. The young private had been scared, and Hawk knew it. They all had been. But they had done the impossible, and now there was a new sense of understanding between them. They had each other's backs, and in a battle like this, that was the only thing that truly mattered. From a distance, Hawk could hear the sound of engines starting. It was the rescue team. The instructors had been watching the entire battle from their observation decks, and now they were sending in reinforcements. Hawk's heart gave a heavy sigh of relief, but there was no time to rest yet. They needed to get to the extraction point, and quickly. "Let's move," Hawk said, his voice now a little more urgent. "We're not out of the woods yet." The squad, though weary and barely able to move without wincing, started making their way toward the extraction zone. They moved as one, supporting each other as they limped across the rough terrain. Hawk glanced over at the wreckage of the alien forces that had once seemed so unstoppable, now nothing more than twisted metal and broken bodies. As they approached the extraction point, the first of the transport ships came into view, descending from the sky with a loud whir of its engines. The sleek alien craft hovered low to the ground, the hatch opening to reveal a team of soldiers, some human, some alien, ready to help them. Hawk could see the stunned expressions on their faces as they took in the scene. The battle was over. The humans had won. The instructors who had observed the battle stood nearby, watching with wide eyes. Hawk's squad was covered in dirt, bruises, and blood, but they were alive, and they had done something that no one thought possible. The lead instructor, the same insected figure who had watched them silently throughout their training, stepped forward. There was no mockery in his expression now, no disdain for the humans who had once seemed like such an anomaly. Instead, there was something different, something that could only be called respect. The instructor's voice was deep, heavy with a mixture of awe and admiration. "I have seen many species fight. I have seen battles that tore planets apart, but I have never seen anything like what you did today." Hawk, though exhausted and aching, straightened his posture. The others around him did the same, standing a little taller now. He wasn't sure what he was expecting from the instructor, but respect was not something he had anticipated. "You defied the odds," the instructor continued. "You fought when the battle seemed lost, and you won, not because you were the strongest or the fastest or the most powerful, but because you refused to be beaten." Hawk said nothing at first, unsure how to respond. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was rare that a warrior of such experience would admit admiration for a species that had so often been underestimated. But Hawk knew the truth in the instructor's words. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about size. It wasn't about advanced weapons or alien technology. It was about heart. The instructor paused, studying Hawk's squad one last time. "You are more than we thought, more than we imagined, and you have proven that humanity has a place in this galaxy." A wave of pride surged through Hawk, stronger than any pain, stronger than any exhaustion. The weight of their victory felt real now. They had earned this respect. They had earned their place, not just among the other species, but as warriors, as fighters, as humans who would never back down. Hawk's eyes met those of his squadmates, and for a brief moment everything was clear. They had fought for each other. They had fought for humanity, and they had won. "We did it together," Hawk said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet strength. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the battlefield, Hawk knew one thing for sure: humans would never be underestimated again.